Hi, Sue.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay. What about you?
Yeah, good week, thanks. Been busy Zooming.
Zooming. So you
Yeah,
haven't got death by Zoom yet?
not quite, no, might be a bit zoomed out.
Zoomed out, yes. It is a bit. It is a bit, but it's better than nothing, isn't it? That we can at least see each other on the
It
screen.
is, yes, and we're preparing for Mental Health Awareness Week next week too, so
We
we're
are indeed.
getting stuff
Yeah,
lined up for that. So it's busy.
busy. Well, there's a lot of worry about mental health now, so it's a good thing to be focusing on it. And today we're intending to focus on some more bits about God, aren't we? We're going
Yeah,
to think about a special Christian perception, which is unusual. Other faiths don't do this particular thing that Christians do, in that we believe a person was uniquely gave God to us. He was uniquely part of God.
yeah.
And that's Jesus, which is possibly the most famous man who ever lived. Changed more people's lives, and yet began a really humble life in an obscure province of the Roman Empire. An amazing tale.
And it has a really weird name, this, doesn't it? We call it Incarnation.
Mm.
People kind of say, you what?
Yes. Because we know, though we believe Jesus was or contained or was especially a revelation of God, he was also utterly a human being. Although there are very few records outside Scripture, there is a recording in the Josephus, I think,
Yeah,
mentions the fact of Jesus. And we're pretty sure he was born in Galilee, which was a province of Israel, which was a very troubled one, where there were lots of physical unrest, high level of unemployment, and lots of political sort of difficulties, and lots of strange revolutionary types, came out of Galilee. And Jesus was one of those. We think he only had about 3 years of adult ministry, from the age of about 30 to 33, but we had a tremendous gathering of the poor and the marginalized, and yet was a big political headache to the Romans.
well, must have been, I think, for 3 years. Well, we call it ministry, but 3 years of teaching and preaching and being about. There must have been something quite revolutionary and quite scary for the Romans in what he was saying, for the kind of response that we now know happened.
Mm. Well, it seems like he must have stirred up the Jewish population a lot. He was very anti-establishment and stirred it up. That some Jews thought he was actually their long-awaited Messiah, a person who would deliver them from the Romans. And the Romans wouldn't like that thought very much,
Not at all. If that's a threat, the Romans are up to beat down any threat.
Any threat. They were quite tolerant in lots of ways. They did give a fair bit of autonomy to local provinces, but if there was anybody within them who was a troublemaker, and Jesus certainly was, they wasted no time in getting rid of him.
Yeah,
And Jesus' end was horrible, wasn't it?
dreadful. Absolutely. Well, doesn't bear thinking about in some
Wasn't there
ways.
thinking about, yes.
An absolute public um, a way of keeping the people down by showing what would happen to them should they step out of line.
Mm.
A very public way of putting down any uprising.
Mm. And of course, when Jesus was crucified, his followers were terrified. They thought they too might get crucified, because the Romans often didn't stop at one. If they could get the leader and the followers of some political, kind of awkward squad, they would do it. They wasted no time. So it was an amazing, horrible death that left everybody devastated, or the followers of these simple, humble, marginalized, poor, the rabble in a way,
Yeah.
left them devastated. But then something amazing seemed to happen.
Tell me more.
Because well, it's the thing on which all of this understanding of who Jesus was hangs. that after he died, he seemed to be still with the people he loved. They seemed to still know he was with them. They seemed to still see him. And they gave it a name. They said the Lord has risen, that he has risen from the dead. And that was a most remarkable thing. Nobody had ever claimed that about anybody before. That wasn't part of the Jewish understanding of life and death, that when you died, you died. And for most of us, that is what we think happens. But for this particular human being, he didn't seem to die. And that gave his followers a whole new take on who this man was.
Yeah. And I think you also have to remember that the Gospels, the scripture, was written from that perspective.
Absolutely, from that perspective. Yeah. Yes, none of these things were written while he was alive. Probably none of the gospel writers knew Jesus as a walking, talking kind of person like they were. They only knew Jesus after this amazing experience. So everything they wrote about him and thought about him in later times would be through that prism, through that perspective, through knowing the end of a story. So the way they would write the stories about Jesus would be strongly affected by their understanding.
Yeah. And the other thing I meant to say when we were talking about the perspective of how people saw Jesus and why he was a threat to the Romans was one of the things that he was called was Son of God. Well, the Roman emperors were also known as sons of God. And in fact, you had to worship the emperors. And so for someone who was basically from the hoi polloi to be called Son of God was an incredible threat to the Roman establishment. So another reason to get him out of the way.
Absolutely, yeah. And the emperors seeing themselves of God, sons of God. Here's another one and God. The emperors even thought they were gods. So here's another person and a direct challenge to that Roman claim of the emperor. Yeah. So he was, absolutely persona non grata. You couldn't go around doing that and get away with it. And indeed, he didn't. But this whole idea of incarnation, I think, is a really, really important idea, the special thing that Christians offer. Although Hinduism has a similar sort of thing. It's got this idea of humans taking on the divine. Hindus have an idea like that, don't they?
Yeah, it's the namaste, isn't it, where you the God in me recognizes and bows to the God that you see in you, which is a wonderful idea. I think it's beautiful, and it gives respect to whoever the other person is, and also engages with humility, I think.
And I think when we sort of read about the great definition of the incarnation, I'm just reaching for my Bible here, which John gives us at the beginning of his gospel. These are those lovely words that are read out during the Christmas service, where John says, "The Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God." And Jesus gets called the Word by John just briefly here, because he speaks for God, he speaks like God, and it's in that great prophetic tradition. But John goes on, Jesus was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. We're born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. And I think that's that most wonderful aspect of the incarnation, that Jesus was containing God in some perfect way, but we can too, which is the namaste, that wonderful, wonderful thought.
It is, it's amazing, isn't it? And it's also, it builds you up, doesn't it, to think that we also are of God, that through Jesus showing us that we too are have God within us, and therefore also have the light of God within us,
The
and
light of God. Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
and the light of love, which I feel in a way it's our duty, but certainly what we should be shining our light into the world,
Mm.
and the light of that discovery, the bit that you read, that Jesus and God, as it were, share the same breath. They are the same breath of life, and we have access to that through what you've just read.
Which is so wonderful. John actually uses that image of light. He says, what had come into being in him, Jesus, was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. Which is a wonderful, wonderful thought. But of course, it feels like it's a process of us. You know, we're not Jesus.
Oh no.
So becoming like Jesus is a process, and that's what his teaching was all about, helping us become that love that is God. So maybe that could be a topic for another time.
Yes,
What do you think?
teaching's another big subject. I don't think we want to start on that now. But next time.
It's lovely having these conversations, and I could go on and on and on and on, but I'm conscious of anybody out there who might be listening to us and watching, if you're brave enough. And if you'd like to offer some observations of your own, we'd love to hear from you. And we'll be talking again about how we become these incarnations through the teaching of Jesus. So shall we go and get a cup of tea and
Let's do that.
Put our feet up after this busy morning we've had.
Super.
Okay.
Take care. Lovely to see you, Cynthia.
Yeah, and you. Bye-bye, Sue.
Bye now.
I'm leaving the meeting. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.